There are three conversations that most couples rarely have in full: about money, about sex, and about what they actually believe and value. Not the surface level version, the real one. But here's what I've come to believe from sitting across from couples week after week. Avoiding those conversations does more damage than the topics themselves. It's not the money that breaks people, it's not even the sex, it's the years of silence around them. I'm Sharon, a postgraduate therapist specializing in relationship and sex therapy. I spend most of my clinical hours with couples in the exact moment that they're trying to say something that they've never said out loud before. Today, I want to talk about why couples avoid certain conversations, what happens when they do, and maybe most importantly, how to actually start having them. Silence is rarely neutral in a relationship. It's not a pause, it's not nothing. Silence is doing something the whole time. Let's start here because I think this is the part that people skip. Avoidance is not laziness, it is not a character flaw. Avoidance is usually trying to protect something, and often that thing is the relationship itself or the image of the relationship that we want to have. Think about it this way: we don't bring up our sexual dissatisfaction because we don't want to hurt our partner's feelings or because we're afraid of what it might actually mean. What if naming it makes it real? What if the partner hears it as rejection instead of a request? What if you say something and it changes how they actually see you? That can be concerning. We don't talk about money with honesty because it feels shameful or because we're scared our partner will judge us or leave. Money is rarely just money. It's tangled up with our sense of competence, our family history, our fear of being seen as reckless, controlling, or maybe not enough. We also don't name what we truly believe about family, faith, or the future because we don't want to discover that we're more different than we thought. As long as we don't ask the question directly, we get to keep believing that we're aligned. And not knowing sometimes feels safer than actually knowing the truth. So we stay quiet. And I want to be clear about something. That quiet often comes from love. It comes from not wanting to hurt the person that you're closest to. It comes from a nervous system that has learned somewhere along the way that conflict is dangerous. Maybe you grew up in a house where disagreement turned into something scary. Maybe your last relationship taught you that honesty gets punished. Maybe you never watched two people you love talk through something hard and come out on the other side still connected. So you don't have a model for what that even looks like. Whatever the origin, the pattern is often the same. We go quiet to keep peace. The quiet grows, it doesn't stay the same size, it compounds over time. I want to slow down on each of these three areas because they don't get avoided for the same reason and they don't get repaired in the same way either. Money conversations are rarely about the number, they're about what the number represents. For one partner, money might represent safety, a buffer against chaos similar to what they grew up with. And for the other partner, it might represent freedom or self worth or love expressed through generosity. When couples fight about money, they're usually not disagreeing about the spreadsheet. That's if you can get both partners to come to the table and even create or look at the spreadsheet. They're disagreeing about what money is supposed to do for them emotionally. And because most of us weren't taught to talk about money as an emotional language, we usually default to talking about it as a logistics problem, meaning the deeper conversation often never happens at all. Desire and intimacy conversations get avoided because they can feel like a referendum on the relationship and sometimes on your own desirability. You may find yourself thinking, If I tell you what I want and you don't want that too, what does that mean about us or for us? If I tell you that I felt disconnected physically, are you going to hear, I don't love you anymore? When you, what it actually means is, I miss you. Couples will often let years pass, sometimes even decades, without having an honest conversation about what physical connection means to each of them. What's changed? What do they miss? What do they miss? What they're curious about and what might they want to try. And this isn't because they don't care, it's usually because the stakes feel too high to risk getting it wrong. This next one is quieter and it sneaks up on people. Because early in a relationship, couples rarely sit down to ask each other, what do we actually believe? How do we raise children? What role does faith or spirituality play in our life? What we owe to our extended families? What retirement should look like? What success means to each of us? These conversations feel unnecessary in the beginning because, well, you're in love. Everything feels aligned, but values are not static. They shift as we grow. And if you're not checking in, you can wake up 10 or 15 years into a relationship and realize you've been building two different lives that happen to share the same address. Here's the thing about avoidance, it doesn't actually make the conversation go away. The cost of avoiding these conversations is that they just tend to happen anyway, but just sideways through resentment, through distance, through a slow drift that neither person can quite name. I've worked with couples who've never admitted that they are actually afraid of something financially. Not the practical fear, but a deeper one. And that might look like the fear of ending up like a parent who struggled financially, the fear of being controlled by their partner with regards to financial means, the fear of never feeling like enough no matter how much they earn. Instead of naming that fear, it turns into quiet control or secrecy or a kind of financial isolation where each partner manages their own anxiety alone. I've also worked with couples whose values quietly diverge and neither one said anything until that gap felt uncrossable. For example, one partner's faith deepened while the other's faded. One partner's definition of family expanded while the other's stayed fixed. Nobody announces the shift, it just accumulated, conversation by unspoken conversation, until one day someone says, I don't even know who you are anymore. And the truth is, that person didn't disappear overnight. They've been there changing in plain sight in all of the moments that never got talked about. That is worth sitting with. Go ahead and let it marinate for a little bit. Because the thing we're trying so hard to preserve by staying quiet is often the very thing that silence ends up eroding. There's a physiological piece to this too. When we avoid a hard conversation, we don't actually calm down. Our bodies just stores the tension somewhere else. That unspoken resentment, it doesn't dissolve. It can show up as irritability over small things like having a short fuse about the dishes or scheduling, even as a body that is tense around your partner when it seems that nothing big is happening. And if I have to be the one to tell you, I'll tell you. That what I just described is dysregulation without a name. And it is exhausting to live with for both people. So, how do you actually do this differently? Let's get practical because insight without a next step is not very useful. Start small. You do not have to have the entire conversation in one sitting. In fact, I would advise against bringing up everything that has troubled you or concerned you over the years with your partner in one conversation. So, one of the biggest reasons people avoid these topics is that they picture the whole conversation happening all at once. Every fear, every issue fully resolved. That is an enormous amount of pressure to put on a single conversation. And it makes sense that anyone would avoid something that feels that big. Instead, think of it as opening a door and not necessarily walking through the entire house. You can say one true thing today and maybe even have a discussion about the one thing with your partner and leave room to say more in another conversation, maybe next week. Name the discomfort. This could be something like, "This is hard for me to bring up, but I want to talk about something." That sentence alone can shift the temperature of a conversation. It signals to your partner that what's coming isn't an attack, it is actually your vulnerability. It gives your own nervous system a moment to steady itself before you speak as well. Lead with what you want and not with what's wrong. This is one of the most important shifts that I help couples work through. Instead of saying something like, "Our sex life is a problem," try saying, "I want us to feel more connected physically, and I'd love to talk about what that could look like for both of us." Instead of, "You're bad with money," try, "I want us to feel like a team around our finances, and I don't think we are right now. Can we figure this out together?" When a conversation opens up with criticism, your partner's nervous system goes right into defense mode before they've even heard a full sentence from you. So we want to try avoid leading with what you believe the problem is, instead lead with what you actually desire. When it opens up with a shared want, you're inviting them in rather than putting them on trial. Choose your moment. Timing matters more than people realize. These conversations are rarely going to go well when they're brought up in the middle of an argument or right before bed or in passing while one of you is distracted. Speaking of distractions, did y'all hear the meow? Empress, you do this every time. She wants to be in here, but then as soon as I start talking, you got something to say. I'll see you later, girl. Let me go open the door. Ask for a dedicated time. For example, can we set aside 20 minutes this weekend to talk about something that's been on my mind? That small act of asking communicates respect to your partner, and it lets them know that they can show up instead of feeling like they're going to get ambushed or blindsided. Be willing to hear the answer, even if it's not what you hoped for. This is the part people don't talk about enough. The goal is truth, not necessarily agreement. You might open up about wanting more physical intimacy and hear that your partner's desire has genuinely changed and they're not sure why yet. You might bring up finances and learn that your partner is carrying even more fear than you knew. The point of the conversation isn't to arrive at a tidy resolution in one sitting, it's to close the gap between what's true and what's spoken versus what's not being said. I really want to address this because it's often the reason that people give up after one attempt at trying to have what they consider a challenging conversation. So, you do the brave thing, you bring it up gently, you lead with what you want, and your partner still gets defensive. They go quiet or they shut the conversation down. First, just know that this is common and it's not necessarily a sign that the conversation was a mistake. It can mean that you touched on something that your partner hasn't processed yet either. If they do shut down, resist the urge to push harder in that moment. Pushing on a closed door rarely opens it. It actually just makes someone brace against it even more. Instead, you might say something like, I can see this feels like a lot right now. We don't have to finish this today. We can come back to it. That keeps the door open instead of forcing it closed or even trying to force that conversation, which could make things escalate unnecessarily. If they do get defensive, try not to match their energy. Even though it's instinctive to do so, you want to try and remain calm. Defensiveness is often fear wearing armor, and underneath, why are you making this a big deal? Is frequently something closer to, I'm scared I've disappointed you, or I don't know how to fix this. What you can do is gently name what you're noticing, such as, I don't want this to feel like an attack, I just want us to be closer. And then give the conversation room to breathe across more than one sitting. Sometimes, even with the best of intentions, these conversations just don't go well. Someone cries, someone raises their voice, someone says something they regret. That doesn't mean the conversation failed. It just means it's not finished and it needs repair before it can continue. Repair can be as simple as coming back later and saying, I didn't say that the way I wanted to. Can we try again? It can be a hand on your partner's shoulder or a text later on that day that says, I'm still with you, even after that hard talk. The couples who last aren't the ones who get the conversation right on the first try. They're the ones who circle back. The repair attempt matters way more than the perfect delivery ever could. Here's what I want you to take with you. The couples who stay connected long term aren't the ones who avoid conflict. They're the ones who keep talking about the hard things, the vulnerable things, the things that matter. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but honestly and repeatedly over the life of the relationship. If one of these three conversations that we talked about today, money, sex, or values, is one that you and your partner have been circling around, let this be your invitation to open the door just a little. Let's not kick it in, friend. You don't have to have it all figured out before you start, and you don't have to try and cover everything all at once. If you want support learning how to have these conversations as a couple, that's exactly the kind of work I help couples do. Whether it's through individual sessions or through Ready or Not, the coaching program I built for couples who want to build this skill together. Subscribe and stay with me, and I'll keep giving you the tools to make the hard conversations far less challenging. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.